you're just tuning in, we opened the show talking more about the deal, the trade that the Houston Texans made, moving from 12 all the way up to number 3 with the Cardinals to land Will Anderson in the draft night blockbuster. Now, I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast today, Cody. Bill Simmons does a podcast with The Ringer, and he had Peter Schrager from the NFL Network Good Morning Football host on as his guest, and they had a lot to say about this trade that the Texans made. So I know you haven't heard it yet. I want to get your opinion on this. But first, this is Peter Schrager setting up a couple different scenarios for how this trade the Texans made, moving up to get Will Anderson, can eventually be viewed.
If Will Anderson's a 10-year starter and the Texans are relevant next year and they could put people in the building and their defense is improved, like, no one's going to be saying, I can't believe they gave up so much for Will Anderson. If they stink and then that ends up being the pick for May or for Wilson, well then, yeah, it's going to be a story that lingers forever.
So these guys are on the total opposite side of how this is going to go. First, let's hear from Bill Simmons. He absolutely despised the trade the Texans made.
You just threw 2 ifs with the Will Anderson trade, which is why it was a terrible trade. This is where, as usual, the VP of Common Sense could have stepped in. They clearly had, the owner wanted the QB, and the management wanted Will Anderson, and this was the compromise. Well, what if we trade up? It's just like my friend Lombardi was making the case. Like, no, if you look at it, what they traded for Arizona was really for C.J. Stroud because the team wanted Will Anderson. It's like, no, I'm actually not going to look at it that way because they could have taken C.J. Stroud at 2, and then they traded all that. They traded 12, 33, and a 24 first and third to Arizona. And the other thing is, we do this in the NBA. Like, why can't you top 5 protect the 24 first? Like, Houston's not going to be good. Newsflash. Guess who's not going to be good next year? The Houston Texans. Yeah. So that's the 7th pick in the draft, the 4th pick in the draft for Will Anderson, who we don't even, you just said, if he turns out to be an awesome 10-year starter, it's like, we don't know for a fact that he's going to turn into really anything.
Bill Simmons' whole argument is baseless. He has no base to his argument. So the argument is Will Anderson has to be good or else automatically all the other picks are way better than him. Like, if you stuck at 2 and picked at 12, that player has to be good. 33's got to be good. The first round pick next year's got to be good. Like, well, Will Anderson may not be any good, so this trade sucks. Well, you know who else may not be any good? The 3rd or 4th best pass rusher in this draft class, the 9th or 10th best player at whatever position that you got at 33. Like, they may not be any good. Like, if the whole argument's Will Anderson may not be any good, my counter argument is, well, the other players may not be any good. And then we're at a stalemate of nothingness. Like, that's the argument.
The one thing I think Simmons needs to bring up, some of his points are fair. I think it's fair to say they gave up a ton because they clearly did. But
it's fair to say that they could not arrive at a scenario where they only wanted to end up with one of those players.
Correct. The thing I think he leaves out, maybe he just doesn't realize, the Texans still have a first-round pick next year. It's not like they're going complete first-round pickless. They still have all their draft picks next year. They have picks from the Browns, including a first-round pick. So if you look at the Texans' picks in 2024, they are still well-positioned to put themselves in a spot where they have a first, a second, a third, a fourth, 2 fourths actually, and a 5th-round pick. I'm looking at it right now. They own the Browns pick. They have their own second. They have an Eagles 3rd next year, and they have their own 4th and Cleveland's 4th, plus their own 5th. So, yes, they paid a premium, but they're telling you they think Will Anderson's going to be incredible. If he stinks, then, yeah, the trade's awful, and they're going to regret it. But they showed conviction telling you, hey, we think this guy's going to be special, and they have total belief in DeMeco Ryans probably being able to identify that type of guy, considering where he came from in San Francisco with Nick Bosa.
And I don't believe they've run away from the Will Anderson needs to be good or this trade looks bad. I mean, Nick Caserio, in the way he talked about why he would want to make the trade or why he made the trade, is like you have to have conviction about the player, and the player ultimately is the person that helps you pay off on this. Now, whatever the 24 pick happens to be, like, and BK made a good point yesterday. This is not the Laramie Tunsil trade where you gutted 2 drafts to get the guy. You didn't even gut a draft. Like, you still have a full draft and then some next year. And you still had a full draft and then some this year after you made the trade. Like, I know that this fan base has post-traumatic Tunsil disorder, from that trade, but you still have both draft picks. And, like, most teams make 7 picks every year. Like they like around there. 6, 7, 8. Like most teams operate that way. Most teams have a first rounder, and in a 3-year span, most teams will have 3 first-round picks. That's the bare minimum that you're given. The Texans, over a 3-4 year span here, are going to have more first-round picks than everybody else still, even after this trade, even after jettisoning one in the future. Now, they're not going to be as high as they could have been, and certainly the Texans draft pick is going to end up higher than the Browns draft pick, short of a disaster in Cleveland. And if there's a disaster in Cleveland, cool, you get 2 things to root for every weekend. The Texans, and you get to root against Cleveland. Like, that's great. That works for me, but they've not run from the fact that this is an expensive deal and it needs to be paid off by Willie Anderson's play. I don't think they've run from that conversation around their trade.
So that was Bill Simmons ripping on the Texans, and obviously Peter Schrager had a chance to respond, and he defended the Houston Texans.
I think it's very specific to that team. They have been so irrelevant the last 2 years, so off and then you get Will Anderson as like D'Amico's guy, Alabama. Here's our cornerstone on defense. And if D'Amico wanted Will Anderson all along and the owner wanted Stroud, or if the general manager wanted Stroud, okay, we have to field a football team. We have been the 32nd team in the NFL for however long. Like, this is fielding a football team, and we needed it for 2023. A lot of teams might have said, all right, we're not in such desperate need for that defensive player. We'll be fine. Texans were. Like, they don't sell jerseys. They don't have any buzz, no relevance. At least the fan base right now is excited, and they can go on and say, we got a cornerstone on offense and a cornerstone on defense. You can make the case for their franchise. That trade made sense.
I agree with all that. And that was my point the night of the draft when we did the reaction video on social media. And that was my point the next day, 1 week ago today, when we were in Kansas City doing the show. Yes, they overpaid. Yes, it's risky. But I believe, given where this franchise is at right now, for the reasons Peter Schrager just outlined on that Bill Simmons podcast, that's why I like the move. I'm on board with the move, despite the fact there's clear risk involved with what they did.